And my committee was not happy. We had made a decision. And that we did battle on that for nearly 6 months. I know that sounds silly, but we're sillier there than we are here. And then we ran into a compromise thing we hadn't even thought of. Our corporate attorney, since we are a registered non-profit corporation under the laws of the state of New York, checked. And we made an interesting discovery. Under New York law, only the trustee members of the committee are allowed to vote. Even the advisors aren't allowed to vote. Only the trustee members, the 3 of us, were allowed to vote. And out of that came a marvelous, marvelous thing. Since only 3 of us could vote on this, the others participated. Their opinions and views became even more important to us than when they had a vote. Everybody could participate now. And when they didn't have to worry about a vote, they participated better. And when we were given the burden of the vote, we paid more attention. Out of that came a really good thing. So we can't follow this principle because of the laws of the state of New York, but in principle we can now follow it completely. Everybody participates. There's no advisors, no superiors, and no inferiors. There's the burden of the vote placed on the trustees, and the rest of the committee gets to work. But it sure stirred things up. Now, in my group, do I get stirred up because the new person wants a full voice? Yeah, I shouldn't. A guy on his second night in there has a right to say something. Do I allow him to do that, or do I just kind of poo-poo it? Well, I kind of poo-poo it sometimes. If I'm really listening, they'll tell me what I need to hear, though. But that's an example of this at that level. It gets tricky walking the spiritual life. Really tricky. I'm still in trouble over that, too. You remember that one, Tom?
Got some questions? Okay. There's another...
No questions on that?
Yeah.
Damn, this is an informed group.
I do, you know, I really hate doing this, but I'm going to do it. Page 21 of the 94-95 edition, you know, under this concept, that last paragraph before the last one, it says there's another good reason for participation, and this one has to do with spiritual needs. All of us deeply desire to belong. We want an AA relation of brotherly partnership. It is our shining ideal that the spiritual corporation of AA should never include any members who are regarded as second class. Deep down, I think this is what we are struggling to achieve in our world service structure. It is perhaps the principal reason why we should continue to ensure participation at every important level. Just as there are no second-class AAs, neither should there be any second-class world service workers either. And I think that has application for everybody in the room. You know, when we get here, most of us are not wired real tight. You know, and I really believe this. I think most people that come to Alcoholics Anonymous are looking us over. You know, and I want to give that guy some kind of a credit for being about a halfway smart guy. And if he's like anything like me, he doesn't just join every little thing that comes along, you know, or follow every flag that comes down the parade trail. I looked it over pretty good usually, and then I might stick a toe in, you know, and see how it felt. But I think all of us have to belong. Now the question is, can we belong to Alcoholics Anonymous without belonging to a group? I don't know. I think it's a little difficult. There's the only for sure instance that I'm aware of is in the case of loners or internationals, and sometimes it's just not physically possible for them to be a part of it. And then, like Don says, you know, once we become AA members, we're members because we say we are, and there's some merit to that statement, but I think all of us are pretty sure in the room that there's a little more to it than that as time goes on. We ought to be allowed to participate. at whatever level we're talking about. And this, really, when you look at this one in that particular light, it all starts to make sense. We could tell you 1,000 stories about the ins and outs of the difference between a trustees committee and a conference committee, and how they discharge their various responsibilities. The trustees are held to a little different standard simply because they're directly accountable by and through our bylaws. And, you know, it was a long time we operated in Alcoholics Anonymous without director's insurance. And the trustees found out, actually during my rotation, that they didn't have any, and it was almost an en masse resignation. Because they were personally liable at that point, you know, and it's pretty easy to break the veil. And here we were diluting the corporation and all this other stuff. So. Not knowingly, but that's in fact what we ended up doing. So, you know, if we don't give them participation at all levels, at the conference level, we exist primarily because the conference charter is held together by the force of group contributions, which is the AA purse, and the force of tradition, which is now in its 50th year. Nobody's come along with a better plan. But that doesn't mean there isn't a better plan out there. It just means that nobody's come along with it yet. So, yeah.
Question. Can we take, I know we've discussed this in my home group, and I think we've addressed it, is that sometimes people come in and they have no idea what a home group is, and they'll come to a group conference and they'll vote. I mean, we can take this down to the group level too, can't we?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've made a statement in our home group that you can only vote if you belong to this group, I think, right? But I think a lot of people, I mean, I've noticed it around where people vote wherever, and it concerns me.
I think one is a spiritual dimmer in AA. I do. One group, one vote. One district, one vote. We compromise that in our own area. We have multiple DCM districts, and they all vote. But I believe in the number one. I think it works good. I think in fives. Now, I like having 5 things going on, at least. You know, it's hard for me to think about one thing at a time. Really hard. And you tell me I can't vote in more than one group, and I'm going to go find 3 I can vote in, you know. So, I can usually have my way with that. The past delegates in our area don't vote. We have a vote through our home group, through our GSRs. But our role primarily, and this is a hard one to understand, our role is primarily advisory. You know, and we have a lot of fun with that. Whatever that means. So,
We don't want the vote either, by the
no,
way.
that's right. We don't want to vote.
Isn't there's a pamphlet, the home group, that talks a bit about voting? Yeah. But I have a question about this, about on issues that affect Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. We have, you know, one voice, one vote. But things that will affect a group that I'm personally participating in, that I participate in service work in, is it the group's decision to allow voting because we're autonomous?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just checking to see what I was hearing there.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lynn. I'm alcoholic. I don't know if any of you have ever worked at all from tapes, but long silences where something's going on tapes aren't really conveying the whole thing to other people. And I just would like to encourage everybody to get to a mic when they have a question, because what we're doing here is wonderful for us, and it's really you know, helpful for us. And maybe, well, if they wanted to know what we were doing, why didn't they come? But at the same time, this is something that can be used as a tool for us in our districts. And I would like to encourage you all to come up to the mic, because then it will be a fuller experience when we take it back home.
You all know that as an individual members, you don't have a vote at the General Service Conference. You don't. You have delegated that to your delegate. Okay. And it's delegated to the people who have the responsibility for carrying out the task. And that's as it should be, and that's part of what this is talking about. If I'm responsible to carry out a certain amount of tasks, you have granted me authority to do that. You've given me your vote of confidence. You've given me your vote of confidence. I'm a trusted servant. If I don't perform well, you can jerk me out just that quick. Yes.
Dave, alcoholic. Isn't it the responsibility of, through my 2 years of service work as a general service representative, not in any of these districts, in California. But
Poor baby.
something that I don't see, and this concerns me, is that in any of the meetings that I attend, you know, it was my responsibility as general service representative of my home group to come back and discuss these issues that I would then discuss with the delegate who would then take it to a vote. And I don't see that. And I'm just wondering is, when you just said authority, it just rang the bells in my head that, you know, in your experience, have you seen a problem with GSRs going without consulting the group on issues?
Of course. My major problem has always been the group that won't listen to the GSR. You're going to the wrong meetings. Come to my group. We have our once a month is our GSR and our central office rep and our district committee persons meeting. If they get it done in 10 minutes, fine. If not, they got the whole meeting. We want to know what's going on.
I was a delegate not too long ago in this area, and I made it a point to get around to every district, and I made it to every district in this state at least once, some more than once. And I used that existing service structure in the building of this group conscience. And part of what I did was not just stand up there and talk for 30 minutes or whatever it was, but buttonhole the GSRs, take them aside and say, what's going on? To keep your ear to the wheel. I was a delegate, but I'm also a human being. I didn't drink any better than any of you. So what it ended up to be was I got way out there. Jesus, I started believing what I was saying half the time. And as a result, you know, it's real easy to get yourself away from what the heartbeat is. And so I used the service structure, and the DCMs were of absolutely invaluable in the building of this conscience. Made a lot of good friends as a result, you know. So, the structure, all the components are here. Everything's in place. Everything works, and you know, the greasy wheel gets the grease, you know. And so everything's there. But our problem is we just seem to think that it's just not good enough. It just don't work. There's something wrong with this picture. But we don't use what's here. See, and you know, the only way to change that is to try to have sessions like this and things like that. Hopefully we get some people informed and make some change at a substantive level.
At home, everybody participates. Each child has a vote. I have 2. My wife has 2, because we are responsible for carrying out all the tests that will come out of that. But they get to participate. Sounds completely unfair, but it works. Okay? Decisions are based on participation, but the decisions are made. The buck does stop somewhere. And that's with the person who's responsible for carrying out the task. They have to have the right of decision, and if we did it wrong, you got a right of appeal. The minority opinion can be heard.
Hi, I'm Mark. I'm an alcoholic. I just wanted to say something about this one vote thing, because I attend a lot of meetings that I really love. And if there's a group conscience in that meeting, I want to bring a message of, I think it's my sort of responsibility to bring a message of substantial anonymity, or, you know, that there's a huge majority before something changes or before, you know, something is voted in. And I always look at voting as the last thing we really need to do. The real process is the discussion. And I love this concept about no second-class AAs, because the guy that's like 24 hours sober that wants to attend a group conscience, I want him to talk and I want him to have a vote, even if he's not informed. Now, this took me some time to actually accept, because I've had some occasions where, you know, I've had people at district meetings or at group consciences that objected to something that the informed group really knew about and thought about and talked to a lot of other people about, and this person just showed up. But sometimes out of that, I can learn something, and I can get out of my own arrogance. So I guess what I want to say is that because I go to other groups, I'm not just going to one home group. I do attend other group consciences, and I do intend to vote because I want to be heard, and I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the other thing is to remember that everyone that does show up at a group conscience should have that same right as well.
Any other?
I've had the unhealthy experience of being in a group of perhaps 10 members, and one person decided they wanted to do something else, and they went out and brought in 15 of their friends and turned everything around, and that's not right. With respect to its own affairs, each group should be autonomous. Chuck?
I'm Chuck, and I'm an alcoholic. And I've been sober since the 7th day of April, 1982. And I'm a GSR for the Saturday Night Jive in Boulder. And I'm also involved in the jail program. Ever since I've been in this program, I've always had a home group. Wherever I've lived, I have been a member of a group. It was my home group, and I attended all their steering committee meetings and all of their group conscience meetings. And I think that's my responsibility, to help guide that group. Is my understanding, and I could be totally wrong, but I understand that the GSO recommendation is that everybody should have one home group and not be a member of every group that you attend their meetings. I'm a member of the Saturday Night Jive group, but I go to several other meetings, quite a few. But I don't vote in their group consciences. If they have an issue that they're going to send the GSR to area to carry their message to area assembly, having, I think Don implied that with his last statement, bringing in a bunch of people to control the vote of a group and then going to another group and controlling that group's vote twists the picture. You don't get a true picture of what the AA community is really wanting. So in our group, we have a kind of a policy. If it involves an issue that's going out of the meeting, out of the group, going to area assembly or to district, only members of that group can vote on it. If it's an issue that involves how we're going to arrange the chairs at the meeting, or what kind of coffee we're going to serve, and a person is a regular attendee of that meeting, they're welcome to vote on that. But not on issues that are going to be carried past the group level.
Any other discussion on participation? And I think that is in the home group Heartbeat of AA. I think that's in that Booker packet. Concept 5. Throughout our world service structure, a traditional right of appeal ought to prevail, thus assuring us that minority opinion will be heard. and that petitions for the redress of personal grievances will be carefully considered. We talked a little bit last night about minority opinion. You know, there's been a kind of a thing going on lately that some people started looking at this minority opinion as maybe it's being misused and perhaps abused in some cases. I don't know if I necessarily totally agree with that, although I will say this, that in the conference, in the General Service Conference, in spite of efforts of groups of delegates to pass resolutions that say, if you bring it up this year, you can't bring it up next year if it gets defeated. It generally is the case that if something gets blowed up, you bring it back next year. And so, as a result, somebody was talking about, Gary, and you were talking about before the meeting about a concepts window shade. Now they got, okay. When I was delegate the first year, it was on the slate. That was in '93. And I'm sure it came up at least once or twice before then. So this thing just been coming up. And understand you had a real pissing contest at the group, and you know, half of them saying hell no, and the other half said hell yes, and this is just, hey, you know, that's how it is. Not done till it's done. And I don't know what done means. See, sometimes, I'll tell you one that we got involved in. And this is a very rare thing that happens in a conference. We had commissioned to write and had produced a draft of the second 25-year history of Alcoholics Anonymous to succeed AA Comes of Age. And it was intended to kind of bring it up to, about 1975 or 80 or so. The trustees' literature committee was unanimously behind the conference committee adopting this draft and putting this thing forward into publication. The conference literature committee took a draft, or they had 11 drafts copied. They read it and unanimously rejected the book. And here they were. And they would not find the middle. They would not find the middle. And you never heard the name calling and finger pointing? Frothy emotional appeal didn't work? Now, who was in the minority there, see? This was during the discussion, so the thing had never come to a vote. And, well, it became obvious after a period of time that we had a huge polarized situation here. And so rather than call for a vote and have a hung jury, where it would be a little difficult to say who was in the minority, or that even a minority report could be filed, or appeal could have been filed, the chairman of the board asked that the two heads of the two committees and one appointee from each committee go out in the hallway and stare her down like human beings. And they did. And they went out. They were out there about 2.5 hours. I don't know what happened. I wasn't a member of that committee. There was some, every once in a while you'd hear something go thump thump. But yeah, they came back with a compromise, and the compromise very simply was that the conference committee would recommend that this thing be put on the shelf for 2 years, and that at such time that everybody had been cleared out of the battle, they'd look at it again. And then I think it was in Dave's rotation, or maybe one after that they looked at, was Linda's, I guess it was. They looked at it and they just, there it sits. Nothing been happening. That was a $600,000 book. And you know what most of that money was spent on? Lawsuits.
It had some real juicy stuff in it.
It was a hell of a book. This right of appeal is important. We don't, you know, there is a process you can go through at any, theoretically, at any level, where if you feel that the conference action, the group action, the district action, area action, whatever, is wrong, that you can file a minority report. Now, it's so seldom used, I don't know that there's a whole lot of people around that even know how to do that in a technical sense. But I know probably at the conference level, at least, you can pilot through the conference coordinator. Now, where it goes from there, I think is a subject of a lot of speculation and discussion. I don't know how far we want to go into that. But even at the group level and at the area level, same principle is involved. And I wonder why it is, how come that once we do get our way in the vote and we carry the day, then all of a sudden it comes up again and say, wait a minute, we settled that. That isn't always the case.
This concept covers the tyranny of the majority is something we must guard against. 51% is not good enough, particularly in terms of spiritual matters and life and death matters. So for our conference purposes, it's been pretty well established that it takes 2/3 vote to be binding on the trustees. If 2/3 of the conference, that becomes a conference action, the trustees must act on it. With one exception. There's a provision in the charter that if the trustees can see that this is we've had some last minute quick emotional stuff that would cost $5 million. The trustees can say, no, not without further investigation here. That's their right of appeal. They can put a plug on it. Otherwise, 2/3 or more is binding on the trustees. And 50% more is a very strong suggestion you do something about it. That seems to have worked so well. The trustees very seldom have ever had to pull the plug, but there have been some occasions, and may still be some occasions. The counterbalance to that is that the conference can, if it wishes, remove any or all of the trustees in one meeting. Out they go. So there's that lovely balance there that nobody pushes the power around. But I've been at one conference, we had a very emotional appeal at the last minute over a piece of literature that should never have been printed. But everybody was tired. You were there. Everybody was tired. It was time to go home. And the appeal was really good. Had us all in tears. So we printed it. I don't think we've sold 10 of them. The people it was written for said, we don't need that. And because nobody exercised this, it went on through. The Native American pamphlet. It just was not well thought out. Personal punitive measures are never taken in AA theoretically. If they are, you can, again, write an appeal specifically. It goes to the chairman of the board. It goes to the delegates. You've got a way of saying, wait a minute, this was not right. I don't know of any case where that's actually happened. It's just, it's available to you as a delegate. We're going to keep the balance. Nobody has too much power. Now, a conference is made up, 2/3 of the vote is delegates. The conference structure is always based on the delegates having 2/3 of the vote. If they could all ever get together, they could run the show. They were never worried about that as trustees because they could never all get together. Okay. The directors on some of the standing committees, or some of the boards, not the committees, but on the boards, are also given a vote at conference because they're involved in the day-to-day working of our board. See, we have 3 boards. I guess you all know that. General Service Board, which has oversight over the whole operation, and that it owns 2 more boards, which are both in essence publishing houses. AA World Services Incorporated and the Grapevine Incorporated, and they appoint directors and trustees to those boards. They vote for themselves. That's the way trustees are put together. They just vote for themselves. But the conference has a vote as to who gets voted on, in most cases. There was a period of time where that was not so. We had some, what were known as general service trustees. They were just people that had been serving on one of the boards, and they just automatically got onto the general service board. And we ran into an interesting problem with that when I was on the board. We have 21 trustees, 14 alcoholic and 7 non-alcoholic, to keep the balance. It turned out that at one point, 11 of our trustees had absolutely no service experience whatsoever, and 10 did, so things were not well balanced. If you've been through the general service structure, you think a different way than anybody on the planet. And if you haven't, you don't think that way. And so we had some problems with that, which have since been rectified. So this is an ongoing, continuing process, and all this can be changed along the way and has been. If you read it, there are footnotes as to where the changes were and why they were made. This right of appeal I like. I've never had to use it, but I sure like the idea that I can write a letter and it'll get listened to. May not be agreed with, but it will be listened to, because the process takes it to the chairman of the board and to everybody else who might be involved. That's all I know about it. It's not
Why don't we,
easy.
we'll take this question, then why don't we take a break?
Just a quick one. Is this right of appeal have to center around a vote that was made, or can it just be something going on in Alcoholics Anonymous?
I think it can be as to any aspect of Alcoholics Anonymous,
Okay.
at the conference level.
Okay, if that took it back to something, I know one thing that's on my mind that we've been talking about here is a conference action was taken in '95. Is there ain't no time limit or anything on that? Could you write an appeal on something that was done in '95 and it would still be addressed, just, you know, because it's a different board and everything?
Yeah, you know, this is the thing, this is where, I wanna get back just for a second to this service structure. If I take it as an individual member and I decide that I don't like the fact that they took the Gray Pages out of the Grapevine, I write a letter to the Grapevine board, and I say, dear board, put them Gray Pages back in, love, Gary. I can be, I'm really trying to be about halfway serious as an example, but they'll say, thanks for sharing, next. What can they do with information like that? I mean, that's just kind of a, do this or else what? Now, if I was to go to the group and say, what do y'all think about the Gray Pages in the Grapevine? They say, we don't care, we want a 12-step drunks. Say, okay, well, how about 2 or 3 of you, we get together for coffee afterwards, talk about putting the Gray Pages back in the Grapevine. Okay, so we get it sold at something resembling the group level. They take it to the district decides, hey, this is not a bad plan, why don't we go ahead and do it? Takes it to the area assembly says, hey, this is a hell of a deal, let's make a conference action. Okay, we've got half the battle done, right? No, we've got to survive it through a trustees committee. We got to get it through a conference committee, got to get it on the floor of a conference to vote, and you know what? A lot of the people, the only reason they buy the Grapevine is because the Gray Pages ain't in there anymore. So where are we going? See, and I don't say this to dissuade you from if you really and truly believe that this is something wrong. But it's just an example of this is what you got to get through to get something to happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's purposely almost impossible to change anything.
It really slows it down, and that's good for us.
Because when we act in haste, we do stupid things usually. But when we act after much discussions, after a thorough, and boy, that word cannot be used enough, thorough airing of the facts, then we usually can come to some consensus.
We still do stupid things, but at least it's well thought out.
Well thought out.
I just want to add, there's a little group up in Winnipeg, Canada, who back in the early '90s addressed a situation. We were publishing foreign big books without the doctor's opinion and some other information in it, and they called GSO on it, and John Johnson up there sent me all the information, all the correspondence back and forth, and as far as I know, this was never done, but GSO changed their minds on it. So,
And they have the right of decision and all the other things,
Okay.
they can do that, that's right.
Okay.
Before we break, Chuck wants to make an announcement. Oh my God.
Up on the food table, the grazing table, 2 of these prints up there, I'm gonna have a pencil laying up there
of AA as a whole, our General Service Conference has the principal responsibility for the maintenance of our world services, and it traditionally has the final decision respecting large matters of general policy and finance. But the conference also recognizes that the chief initiative and active responsibility in most of these matters should be exercised primarily by the trustee members of the conference when they act among themselves as the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the umbrella of the General Service Board is I think it's already been mentioned, but is like a parent company to two New York corporations, one Grapevine and the other is AWS Inc., which has the intellectual properties that are owned by Alcoholics Anonymous, which would be the copyrights primarily, and the rights to publishing. This particular concept is a delegated authority concept. It deals with the same thing that we, as an area assembly, give our area committee, in effect, the opportunity to do, to be responsible for and to take care of most of the business that the area assembly deems is within its purvey to take care of. And you know, it's a proven fact that if the conference itself had to actually try to handle this stuff on a day-to-day basis, it would be very much like trying to get a worldwide vote of groups to do, you know, whether or not we was going to publish that concept's window shade deal or whatever the topic at hand might be. And a lot of this, although it seems like it's kind of covered up with stuff, what it is, it's trying to codify this business of mutual trust. And it's trying to set up a structure whereby this mutual trust thing isn't just some whimsical, you know, little poem that we say, or we don't just give it lip service. It actually has some depth and weight and some meaning. And so one of the things that the conference has to recognize is that they are not generally given the responsibility for the day-to-day management of the affairs of the General Service Office. But every conference that I'm aware of has a faction of delegates that absolutely can't get their hands out of that and have to micromanage and tell them how to do it and what color it is and, you know, and where, how come you spent, you know, can't you guys go with second-class postage? And I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So, thank you. So anyway, again, just another example of the fact that the General Service Board has been given basically the authority by the conference and ultimately at the top of the ladder by the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole to take care of the business end of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Trustees have to make a lot of decisions. Oh, and let's take a couple. For instance, Alcoholics Anonymous is requested to be present at a number of different kinds of medical conventions and other conventions throughout the year. Through our CPC committee, they want us to set up a booth at national conferences, for instance. Well, the board's job is to determine the policy. Do we do that, first of all? Yes, we do. Now, how do we do that? And which of these come in? We'll get maybe 100, 150 requests a year. We only honor 52 of them. So the board will make those decisions based on the policy that, yes, we will cooperate with our friends, and here are the circumstances by which we will do that. And without asking anybody's permission, we even made up some traveling displays, CPC displays, that would go out both with the team from General Service in the big conventions, or if you had a local one that you had been requested to in this area, there was a traveling display that would be shipped to you. So you had a really good presentation to give at the booth, not just some stack of literature somewhere. Those are based on policy that the board established. They make those decisions and don't even ask anybody's permission to do so. And that's as it should be. This covers that. Our public relations policy is established by the board. We are subjected to the public press now and then, not as much as we used to be, because we're old news, frankly. But it still comes on, so let's say Dan Rather wants to do an interview with somebody from Alcoholics Anonymous. One of our non-alcoholic trustees will go take care of that. When an award is coming our way, one of our non-alcoholic trustees will accept it, because they don't have any anonymity. It's not necessary. This is policy. So we know exactly what to do, and somebody's picked, and it all gets taken care of. In 1987, the State Department put together the first trip to the Soviet Union, and it was requested that we send someone. And it happened so fast that the normal policy would be that the trustees at large, that's one of their tasks, because they don't have a constituency, if you will. And we were both on the International Committee. That's one of our job assignments. It happened too fast, so the board, by a telephone poll, picked John Bragg, our General Service Office Manager, to go, because he was available, it was easy, it was quick, and he was knowledgeable. We didn't ask your permission for that either. We just did it, because it's based on policy that we will cooperate. He came back with the understanding that it was a show and tell trip and that they were getting ready to come to this country. And again, we're cooperating with the State Department through Hazelton, because Dan Anderson was requested to put the trip together. And the trip was going to be, these Russians would be broken into 3 different teams over a 10-day period. They wanted to see what this country did about alcoholism. So there would be tours of treatment centers and EAP programs. And Dan said right off the bat, if you don't have AA members on this trip, you're wasting everybody's time. So this is a friend of ours, in case you didn't know that. So the board picked the 3 people that would go on that trip. The 2 trustees at large and the secretary of the International Committee. That's the policy. So the decision was made. There was no favoritism. Those are the folks that would handle this. So Webb Johnson took the California group, and I took the group that went up through the middle of the country. And Sarah Price was with the group going up the East Coast. Fun trip. I wish I had time to tell you about the whole thing. Sarah called me from Delaware and says, "Why did we do this?" And I was feeling the same way. All I did was carry luggage. And every time anybody asked a question about AA, somebody else answered it. And so by the time we got to Chicago, my ego was bruised. So our tour guide, they got some buses from one of the local Skid Row joints, and the driver was a black jazz musician, and he and I speak the same language, so I figured, to hell with the Russians. He and I started having some fun. And the next thing I know, the Russians want to talk to me, because they're having fun too. They've been bored stiff by all this show and tell. And things began to occur. Anyway, the trustees made that decision, as they should. This is policy and administration. This was followed by a request from the Russians that we send a delegation from Alcoholics Anonymous to the Soviet Union at their request. That took a great deal of discussion at the trustee board level as to, first of all, should we even do that? Are we cooperating or are we promoting? We went through some agonies because it was our decision to make. We knew we did not need to, nor would we be foolish enough to ask you. We had to decide, should we? And then how should we? And then who should we send? And of course, as you know, that trip took place. We went as tourists, because that's how they said to go. They said, if you go with the official, it's another show and tell. They'll take you where they want to see you. What you need to do, our Russian friends said, is that you've got our names, and here's a bunch of other names. Write to all these people and say, we're going to be coming through Moscow on such and such a date. We'd like to stop by and see you. And that's what we did. And so we scheduled our trip that way. Spent 17 days on that trip just talking to people about AA, and some remarkable things happened. But the trustees made those decisions based on these principles and their obligation to make that kind of decision as to whether we should or shouldn't, and how we should go about it. They flew us coach. I thought that was kind of cheap. That's a 22-hour flight from Moscow. Damn. In coach. The Nobel Peace Prize discussion. The trustees we've given them the authority to make decisions on those kinds of issues, trusting that they will take time to fully consider it, which we did. When I talk about going crazy at the board level, it's the same as any group. We really discuss all the lunatic ideas that are available until we come to consensus as to how to go about this thing. And nothing happens even on the board without a 2/3 majority. The recommendation won't pass without 2/3. God, there's so many stories I'd like to share with you about that. I learned to trust the process, even though I do not to this day trust all the people involved in the process. The process does work. It has its own safeguards, and it's mostly about communication. As long as we keep talking, we will eventually come out with the right solution. Particularly if the minority will speak up when we have made the wrong decision. Keep us talking, and we'll be okay. I'm trying to think of some of the other policy measures the board has. Well, your literature. You don't get to vote on your literature. That's one of the favorite places for me because it takes so long to get a piece of literature through. You're looking at a 2 to 3 to 4 year process from the time somebody brings it up till it actually happens. Yes, please.
Just a question on, does this pertain, what you're talking about, to the same process that happened to the removal of the circle and triangle?
In a fashion.
Yeah. I'm going to give you my view of it.
Holy Christ.
Now, this is... I think it was one of the most brilliant moves that our General Service Office manager ever made. Okay? We were about to get into litigation. Bad litigation over a symbol that's used by over 55 other outfits anyway. It's not ours. Bill warned us, don't copyright these things. Because if you copyright or trademark something, you're required by law to defend it if somebody else uses it, or you lose it. So, and this is just my view of it, what I watched George do, and I know him pretty well, so I think I'm close, is he saw to it that we stopped using it, so we don't have to ever defend it. And because we won't defend it, it will eventually go into the public domain, and then we can use it again. And at the same time, if you were reading and listening, the word from GSO was, we're the only one that can't use it. If you want to use it as a group or an area, use it.
Right.
It's just GSO will not defend it in court. We would rather lose the copyright.
Right.
A very positive thing that took place. Is that how you saw it happen?
Yeah, it was a sticky wicket, and we had actually
It was tricky.
initiated litigation against one chip manufacturer for failing to take the circle and triangle off. The problem, the wicket that the Board of Trustees was in, was that it is against the law in New York and nearly every other state to dilute assets. And trademarks and copyrights are considered assets, intellectual properties. And so, for us to, it wasn't that we had a choice. We had no choice but to defend ourselves against misuse of our trademark. So, or else the board was subject to a proceeding by the New York Attorney General's office was ready to file a suit against the Board of Trustees for diluting assets. It was a lose-lose all the way around, and it was the only way out, what he's talking about, and it was a huge strategic move. The conference was not happy. You know, and it was, you know, there was a lot of personalities involved in this discussion, and there was appearances made that we had just suddenly decided to do this litigation, but that came as a result of an opinion letter from counsel that basically said, we're in trouble with this thing. very much like the copyright thing, I'm sure shut down. We didn't know it was happening until it was too late.
Does that answer that? Yeah. We could still use it.
Yeah. It's just the General Service Board will not use it as an official symbol anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some question actually as to whether or not we probably stole it in the first place, but,
Well, we did a survey in '86 to see how often it was being used. We found 55 other entities, including civil defense, that use the same symbol. The Swiss Auto Club uses the same symbol. It's a very ancient symbol. So we shouldn't have copyrighted it in the first place, and Bill even mentions that in here. Don't trademark and copyright these things. And, but we do.
we need that. Any other questions?
Hmm?
When was it copyrighted originally?
Trademarked in...
Trademarked.
It was trademarked in '59?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. When we became big business.
When we came of age.
He gave the keys to the car to the 6-year-old.
Yeah, that's it. Drive, baby, drive. Okay, no further on that.
Thank you for the question. That's the kind of stuff that'll make this work. We don't know what you need to know.
Let's
We
go
know
to...
too much.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Let's go to Concept 7, conference. This is about, out there, the one aspect of this I'd like to talk about just for a second is the money side of it. It's like our 7th tradition and indeed our 7th step. This, the conference recognizes that the charter and bylaws of the General Service Board are legal instruments, which they are. They're New York corporations. One is for-profit, the other is a not-for-profit. That the trustees are thereby fully empowered to manage and conduct all the World Service affairs of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is further understood that the conference charter, which is in the front of the concept, is itself is not a legal document. That it relies instead upon the force of tradition and the power of the AA purse for its final effectiveness. Very simply, the conference charter is an embodiment of a deal that was made between Bill Wilson and the fellowship as a whole that says if you'll let me put this conference together to succeed the co-founders and to allow this fellowship a vehicle by which it can go ahead and start taking care of its own business, we'll give you these promises in return, which are contained in our warranties, and we'll get into those in a little bit later. But it is a handshake deal between Bill, and what is now the General Service Conference and the fellowship as a whole, because there's nothing legally binding between the fellowship and the General Service Conference itself, and the conference and the General Service Board. So if we decide that, you know, we get a big wild hair and we decide that we're not going to have a conference anymore, the General Service Board will continue. They will continue through the predicted survivability of the end of the corporations, I suppose, and then when the money's gone, everybody goes home, I guess. So this, just to dissolve the conference isn't necessarily an answer to any problem that we've got. How does the conference work? What funds it? Well, AA group contributions primarily. And publishing income, because we typically don't support ourselves totally in the level of group contributions matching conference and group expense. And it also relies on the force of tradition. We're in our 50th year of this conference. And so it's become kind of an icon part of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's generally accepted by the bulk of the population of the fellowship. It is not without detractors. Hardly any that I know of, but there are some. And these detractors sometimes can raise all kinds of hell. If the groups feel strongly enough as a whole, now if you can get all the groups to agree on anything, good luck. But now if they as a whole decided that they didn't agree this conference is all wet and you're wrong, they yank the plug on the money. And that's the ultimate authority. That is the ultimate authority that the groups have. But with that comes a responsibility, and this is, you don't ever want to offer that as an option without saying, okay, now what's the other side of that coin? What's going to take its place? The DCMs and the district committee? I don't think so. We can't agree within committees about what we're doing. So this is, this process and this thing that they've got outlined in here seems to work pretty good. But this is if the groups absolutely were compelled to do it, if the trustees and the General Service Board and in fact the conference, which is a product of the group township, if they got so sideways, ultimately the groups could yank the plug. When I was delegate, I've never believed that that's the problem. I think we ought to just flood them with money as groups, get self-supporting for crying out loud, and get the price of this literature down to cost. We don't even pay royalties now, except some piddly amount to some cousin that refused to die.
That's over in about 2 more years.
I think that's over in 2 more years anyway, so, yeah. So, those people live a long time, them Burnhams. But anyway, I think one of them's 104 or something. I bet they weren't thinking about that when they redid that royalty deal, but the point of it is that, if we ever could get to that place where we were supporting truly our services, the actual cost of them, the conference and everything else, the literature price would be down there to the point where we wouldn't have to depend on these damned overages to keep supporting our services. And then our literature copyrights, not only in this country but worldwide, they just are so ridiculously small of a problem because the price of our literature is so low, we don't have any competition. And so we're able to keep the integrity of our message. But boy, once it gets to a certain threshold, it's just like everybody and their dog's a publisher.
I was just waiting for what was next.
That's a good stopping place.
The trustees are responsible by law, by New York law, for the management of the money, the keeping of the property that we rent. We don't own it, we rent it, and certain other legal obligations. When I came on the board, I had to sign a personal responsibility note that I was responsible for over $8.5 million. Made me nervous. But that's the way it is under the law. If anything went wrong, I don't know, who would I get that kind of money? Where I told you how we discovered that only the trustees could vote in committee, so we're not allowed to legally have anybody but the trustees voting in committee. Because the trustees are responsible for what goes on, there are some ways that the trustees are responsible to stop certain conference actions. Even though 2/3 of the conferences do something, there are some circumstances where the trustees must not do that. And they're clearly defined here. If in a time of heavy or haste or heavy stress, the conference should take an action in clear violation of its own charter or that of the General Service Board, and the trustees have to say, no, legally we cannot do that. It has to be reconsidered. And there's a process that's set up for contacting the delegates and all that. Although traditionally the trustees should never substantially exceed the conference-approved budget, they should feel entirely free to reduce the budget during any fiscal year if they see it's necessary. If by reason of unforeseen conditions any particular plan, project, or directive of the conference should become unpractical or unworkable during a fiscal year, the trustees should, without prejudice, be able to use their right of veto and cancellation. If it turns out that going to those conferences with the CPC turns to be a bad thing for some reason, we can stop it altogether. We can stop any of the things we're doing And the trustees are responsible for that legally, and we've given them the authority to do that. The other side of it is, as the trustees, we understood clearly that the conference charter took precedence over that unless it was a legal matter, that we would never go contrary to the conference unless it was seriously gonna get AA in trouble, meaning we could lose our nonprofit status and our charter, which would put us out of business. We could not legally touch the $10 million a year we need to get at. So it's an interesting balance. It's a little schizophrenic back there. And so we have hired some folks. We won't lose any more copyrights because we now have some attorneys who are continually checking and updating where we stand with copyrights and trademarks. It's a little extra expense, but it'll keep us out of trouble. So those are some of the trustee responsibilities, to make sure that you are not distracted from your 12-step work by those kinds of worries. Some of you remember the 2 years we had lousy big books, they just fell apart. Open them up, they'd fall apart. So we changed printers, but what you may not remember is if you got one of those, all you had to do is send it back and you got a new book. It cost a little bit of money, but at, what, $1.50 or $2, it didn't hurt us too bad. The trustees had to make that decision. What are we going to do with this? So if you have one of those old crappy books, send it back. They'll give you another. It really doesn't need any more amplification than that, I don't think. Those are some of the responsibilities that the trustees have. Huh?
Will the fourth edition then be under a new copyright, or how does that work?
Let me get real clear with the fourth edition. There is no such animal. The conference action is for the trustees literature committee to bring back a draft for a possible fourth edition. And that draft hasn't been brought back yet. It'll be there this year. I talked to the people up there. The chances of it becoming a fourth edition this year are really very slim. That draft will be, there's more to be done. And there's still movement to get it restored to its original first edition status, so that isn't over yet either. So we're looking at a year or two, I hope, as to whether we have that or not. It will be a fourth edition, and it will have its own copyright. But we're not going. We've hired the people to deal with that. We don't own anything but the stories anyway. Everything in the first edition Big Book is in the public domain. The forwards, the doctor's opinion, all the pages up through Dr. Bob's story, are all in the public domain.
Right. No questions on this one?
Don't you dare.
Come on, David. Come on, David. Come on, David. Come to the microphone, David. Let me ask a question. It's 9 o'clock. How late do you want to go? Because we can meet again in the morning, too. How long do you want to go? Because we'll go as long as you want, but you got to be getting tired.
Yeah.
No, I passed tired 2 hours ago. What time's breakfast? 7 to...
Breakfast starts at same drills today, 7 to 9.
If we will do it, since breakfast starts at 7, we can meet at 8 if you get out of bed. We don't have to wait till 9. Come on.
Could I maybe suggest that we go ahead and take one more, Concept 8, that would put us up into basically 9, 10, 11, and 12. We're probably going to have to spend a little time on 12 with the warranties.
We
because
should.
those seem to be something that's been coming up quite a little bit lately, and might help clear up some of the confusion I know that's got to be out there. I'm pretty confused. I'm sitting up here. So, is that acceptable compromise? Well, we'll decide that when we get done with this. We'll have another decision to make after we get done with this one, okay? What time we're gonna start tomorrow. Okay?
That's not an outside issue.
Okay, concept 8, the trustees of the General Service Board act in two primary capacities. A, with respect to the larger matters of overall policy and finance, they are the principal planners and administrators. They and their primary candidates directly manage these affairs. B, but with respect to our separately incorporated and constantly active services, the relation of the trustees is mainly that of full stock ownership and of custodial oversight which they exercise through their ability to elect all directors of these entities. In other words, the General Service Board is directly responsible for the trusteeship at the level of the General Service Board. But each separate board of AAWS Inc. and Grapevine Inc. has its own separate slate of directors, and it has people that liaise with the General Service Board. Stock ownership. When Works Publishing was first put together, it was a member corporation. Okay, a third of the stock was in Bill's hands. Hank Parkhurst had the other third, and the other third was sold off for $20 a share, or 25, or whatever they could get. One guy mortgaged his car and bought a bunch. Okay, and that's how. Right. And that was ostensibly to get the big book published. Of course, they had a little overhead expense and a few things, you know, and they frittered away and dillied away. And they got a little money from the Rockefellers and so on and so forth, but. They were trying to put this thing together. Well, then Hank got drunk, but Hank needed $250. So he traded the stock to Bill, and Bill gave $250 of foundation money for the stock and an old desk that he was complaining about, that he thought he better have that desk. He was going to set up shop down the street. And so 2/3 of the stock was in Bill's name. And then at that point, Bill made a deal with the foundation about royalties. And that was the original royalty agreement, you know, that it's a matter, I think it's a service piece actually, the original royalty agreement. It's been amended that I know of 3 times since. In exchange for that royalty agreement, Bill assigned his 2/3 ownership in Works to the Alcoholic Foundation. At that time, it changed, it stopped being a member corporation, and it was a stock corporation. The General Service Board trustees actually hold the stock, their proxies. Well, that's not true. They hold the stock in trust. The delegates and the remainder of the conference actually have the proxies. For, I guess that's one way of looking at it. That's a kind of a piss-poor way of looking at it. But all right, they're the holders in due course, okay, the General Service Board trustees. And a part of what Don had to execute was documents related to that stock. Okay? So we are, by and through our delegated responsibilities to our trustees, we are in effect the owners of Alcoholics Anonymous in all of its ramifications. The General Service Board, the old foundation stock, the Alcoholic Foundation stock, is now the AAWS stock, or that's not true, God damn it. Works Publishing Inc. stock is now AAWS Inc. And the old foundation has the custodial oversight over Works and what eventually became AAWS Inc. That's, a lot of people get all bent out of shape about this deal with Bill and the royalty deal. But the very simple fact of it was he was creating our literature for us. And there was a strong feeling at the time that, you know, he ought to be compensed for that. He was well paid for that. And unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, most of the money that went into that actually happened after he died, because the book sales really weren't that great until basically in the mid-70s. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of throw that in for a little cannon fodder.
Bill got 50 cents a copy, royalty. And when he died, it went to Lois. And when she died, it went to the foundation and a couple nieces and nephews for a 10-year period, and then it will cease entirely. So with that, we're talking several millions of dollars over a period of long period of time. I don't know of anybody that ever begrudged them that. Even Dr. Bob did it. It was an author's fee, a writer's fee, and, based on sales. That's the amount that went into it. Stepping Stones now has been kept alive for that 10 years with some of those royalties, and then that will come to an end in, what year was that?
That was this last year.
This last year, it's
It
done.
ended.
Yeah, 10 years, it was over. Custodial oversight was an interesting proposition. The Board of Trustees meets every quarter in New York for a long weekend, a really long weekend. For that board to try to run the day-to-day operations of Alcoholics Anonymous would be absolutely insane. Too far out of touch. I lived in Denver, and one trustee lived in Washington State, and another one's out in California. This is structured so that the General Service Board of Trustees owns and operates two other corporations. The AA World Services publishes and distributes literature and runs our General Service Office. That's their job. What the General Service Board has in terms of control there is they pick and choose who serves on that board. So what we as General Service Board trustees did with AAWS is said, do this. This is what we want. And if they did it, fine. If they didn't, we could unelect them. That's how it works ideally. We're people. Doesn't always work that way, and it isn't working that way right now. There's a tendency for the General Service Board, when things aren't going quite right, to step in and try to manage those other two corporations and that office. So there's always a tightrope to walk there, and you may have noticed it with your groups. I heard it here. Old timer gets a group going, and then steps back a little and lets it run until something goes wrong, and steps back in and fiddles with it. And steps back out, and then steps in and fiddles with it. And it's the fiddling with that screws everything up. I've seen some bad things happen because of that while I was on the board. The General Service Board taking action on getting rid of an employee. It was none of our business. It belonged to the board whose business it was, and it screwed things up pretty badly. But ideally, that's how that works. Custodial oversight. Okay. Those two boards have to report to the General Service Board on what they're doing with their money. Because the board has to report to you. And they pick who they need. We currently, for a long time, we didn't have a publisher on any of our boards, and we run two publishing houses. Never made sense to me, but we sure had a lot of treatment professionals on the board, which didn't make a lot of sense to me either, but that's what we did. Now we have a publisher on board, and it's creating its own problems. Because we don't operate a pretty good publishing house, and this guy knows it, and he's making suggestions. And, but that'll get the discussions going. So, you understand custodial oversight? When I got that, I was glad to hear that. I don't have to worry about the office. It's none of my business. All I have to do is concern myself with the other board whose business it is to make sure that things are going right. Tom, you had a quizzical look.
This may not be related to this, it just popped into my head.
Uh-oh.
We'll make it related.
I'm Tom, I'm an alcoholic, been sober since June 15th of '86. You mentioned Wayne Parks today. I met him when I first got sober. He, out at Canyon de Chelly, he spoke out there. What a sweet man. And came down through our service, general service in New Mexico, that he was getting the shaft. And that when you called the general service office, that there was a gag order about talking about that. What's that about? That's what came into my head.
You asked. I don't think we can make this one fit. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I want to do that on tape. No, it's truly not a good thing. Okay? It's not secret, but it's not a good thing, and I don't want to put it on tape. I'll be glad to talk to you about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So those who wanna find out about that after the meeting.
Yeah.
We're done. The exciting, thrill-seeking adventure was on Concept 9, which reads, good service leaders, together with sound and appropriate methods of choosing them, are at all levels indispensable for our future functioning and safety. The primary world service leadership, once exercised by the founders of AA, must necessarily be assumed by the trustees of the General Service Board of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the essay, I think is possibly one of the best pieces of writing that Bill ever did, this business of leadership in AA and every vital need. And I'm not going to paraphrase that or anything, but I do want to talk a little bit about how we pick our trusted servants. And I know how it is in some groups. I know how it was in the group that I got asked to be a GSRN. They asked me if I had gas in the car. Now, I don't know if that really qualified me to be a general service representative. Probably not. But that's how I got started. I think sometimes we pick people in the misguided notion that somehow it's going to keep them sober.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's necessarily true in all cases. I think as a sponsor, it's an obligation that I have, certainly with the people that I work with, to expose them to service, not necessarily just general service, but all service at all levels. I don't believe that general service is necessarily mandatory for everybody. There's a certain type of a person that sometimes this thing doesn't appeal to. But I still think that it's the group's obligation and my obligation as an individual to at least expose them. And sometimes exposure is kind of like the measles, you know. Sometimes it catches and sometimes it don't. Group service, on the other hand, is mandatory. I don't believe that that's an option. I don't think that's a choice. When it's my turn to make coffee, I make coffee. When it's my turn to open up, I open up. When it's my turn to set up the chairs, it's my turn. Tear them down. If the group has a business meeting, I have an obligation to be there. And I have an obligation too to take the people that I sponsor there and show this is what we do. This is why we do what we do. And I think we're not fulfilling our responsibility to people sometimes when we just say, well, you can go if you want to. Hell, I don't want to do nothing.